Hi, my name is Mina Locke. Thank you for being here with me. If you want to hear more true family drama stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe. It gives me the strength to keep pulling moments out of the shadows and laying them down where they can finally breathe. I thought I was preparing a simple dinner, a gathering meal like my mother always called it. Rosemary sprigs hissed against hot olive oil, their perfume climbing the kitchen walls, filling every corner of the suburban house we all pretended was peaceful. Outside, the last stretch of sun smeared gold across the blinds, and the hum of traffic faded into the background. Inside, it was my hands, my knives, my timing, my care. Chopping onions until tears blurred the cutting board, basting the roast until the surface glistened, polishing the wine glasses so their rims caught the candlelight just right. By the time the guests drifted in, our father Jonas, Mother Evelyn, Aunt Marjorie with her tote bag of mysterious forgotten papers, I had already set the table. Cloth napkins folded like little envelopes, forks aligned with an almost military precision candles, trembling in their holders as if they already sensed what was about to happen. Then Valora made her entrance. My sister older by 2 years, but older in the way she carried herself like the whole room was a stage and she was born already holding the script. She didn't bother bringing food, not even flowers. She floated into the kitchen, plucked the Merlot from my hands, and with a flourish stepped into the dining room where everyone waited. "Let's toast," she said, lifting the glass. Her hair caught the glow of the chandelier. Her bracelets chimed like accomplices. And then she laughed. To family. And to my maid, Mina. The words sliced cleaner than any knife. The table erupted not in shock, but in laughter. Polite, scattered, nervous, maybe, but laughter all the same. Forks tapped plates, knives clinked against china. Even Aunt Marjorie tittered into her napkin. No one corrected her. No one said she's your sister. Not even my parents, who simply looked down at their glasses as though Merlot held the answer to everything unsaid. Production note: if you could have seen it on film, close-up of my hands setting down the bottle of Merlot, careful, steady, as though I was placing dynamite. The camera would linger on the condensation, tracing down the glass, the faint tremor in my wrist. In the background, the noise of conversation blurred, muted, until the only sound was the faucet in the kitchen sputtering to life. Water rushing into the sink like static drowning out the beat of my own heart. It was meant as a joke. That's what they would all say later if I dared to bring it up. Just a joke, Mina. Don't be so sensitive. But the cruelty wasn't in the punchline. It was in the silence that followed. The silence of complicity, the kind that says more than words ever could. I stood there, candlelight flickering against my face, and wondered how many times a role has to be spoken aloud before it becomes truth. Tonight, I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a sister. I wasn't even a guest at my own table. I was the maid, and they had all just agreed. The motif repeated itself like a heartbeat, wine glasses catching the light candle flames, bowing in invisible drafts, knives striking porcelain. Ordinary sounds to anyone else, but to me they were percussion in a score of erasure. Every clang and clink covered the thud of my chest, the rising tide of shame that no one else seemed to hear. I don't remember what was served first. I don't remember the words of the toast that followed. What I remember is the taste of iron at the back of my throat, the sudden need to grip the edge of the table so I wouldn't float away the way my mother's eyes flickered toward me and then darted back to her plate like a guilty child. Do you know what it feels like when your family rewrites your role in front of you and everyone nods along as if the script was always that way? That's what I want to ask you now here as I begin this story. Have you ever been placed in the wrong role inside your own home? Press 1 if yes, 0 if not. Because that night, under the perfume of rosemary and the glow of candles with the sound of silverware covering the drum of my own heart, I learned what it means to be erased one joke at a time. When people walk through the front door, they say this house smells like rosemary and old wood, but to me it has always smelled like my mother. The scent is stitched into every surface, the oven that burned her roasts more often than not, the cushions she insisted on airing out every spring, the recipe cards spotted with oil and fingerprints. This house was not a gift. It wasn't passed down in a will or wrapped in a bow by some generous relative. I bought it after 10 years of double shifts and coupon clipping, after mornings that began in a diner and ended in a warehouse. My knuckles cracked from carrying crates, my back bent from too many hours of leaning over a register. I worked 2 jobs so my family could have one home they didn't have to apologize for. My mother called it the reunion house. She liked to imagine us gathered here, every holiday noise spilling down the hallway, casseroles steaming, everyone too full to argue. You'll see she'd say scribbling notes on the back of a grocery list, a place like this keeps a family together. But tonight the kitchen smelled of rosemary, and there was one chair at the table that would never be filled again. Her chair. The seat she claimed with a folded quilt to cushion her spine where her glasses always dangled from their chain, where she kept a small tin of mints no one else was allowed to touch. The chair stood open, perfectly tucked in as though waiting. My eyes caught it every time I leaned over the table like a missing tooth in a smile. On the counter lay a recipe card in her handwriting, the corners curling a brown stain spreading across the ink like a shadow. Her chicken and potatoes never elegant, always heavy with butter. The dish that made our house feel like a house. I traced her handwriting with my thumb, the loops of her M's, the way she underlined salt 3 times as if afraid we might forget. Production note. If this were film, the camera pans across the recipe card, the oil stain catching the light like a bruise, then cuts to the empty chair framed by flickering candles. Silence in the background, broken only by the faint tick of the oven cooling. Beside the card was a Polaroid my mother in her gardening hat, half smiling, caught mid-motion with dirt on her knees. I was there too, but invisible because I was the one holding the camera. Always the one behind the lens, never in the picture. My siblings lined the edges of albums with their faces. Mine was hidden in the absence between frames. That day, as always, I had been the one to press the shutter, making sure everyone else was remembered. Now the photograph sat on the counter, a reminder that even memory can exclude the person who builds it. I set the table anyway because that's what she would have wanted. The clink of plates against wood felt heavier than usual, as if gravity had thickened. I folded the napkins the way she used to into soft triangles. I poured wine even though no one asked for it, the ruby liquid catching the last sweep of sunset through the blinds. And each time I looked across, there was that chair, her chair so neatly in place that it mocked the idea of presence. What do you call a family meal when the heart of it has stopped beating? My mother said a table could keep us together. She was wrong. A table is just wood and nails without the person who makes it sacred. I thought about all those years I worked myself raw to buy these walls, believing that permanence would anchor us. But permanence is a myth. Houses crack recipes, fade photographs, leave someone out. And people, the people who make it all matter, leave too. The rosemary smelled the same as always. The recipe card looked the same as always. The photograph smiled the same as always. But without her in that chair, none of it tasted the same. When Valora said she was hosting a community dinner, I thought she meant the kind my mother used to picture neighbors and cousins gathered around one table, passing casseroles and gossip in equal measure. I didn't realize she meant a stage with me cast in a role I hadn't agreed to play. The dining room was transformed that night. 2 folding tables stretched end to end, covered with white linens borrowed from the church basement. Candles trembled in tall glass cylinders, their flames bowing to the air vents overhead. The clatter of silverware mingled with the perfume of rosemary chicken garlic bread and cheap wine uncorked too quickly. The room buzzed with conversation, with laughter that didn't belong to me. I carried the last tray out from the kitchen, my wrists aching from balancing bowls of salad slick with dressing, and that's when I saw it. At the far end of the table, away from the centerpieces and toasts, there was a card. A small rectangle of stiff paper neatly folded so it could stand upright. In block letters printed by the same machine that had typed everyone else's names, mine read, Support Staff. M. Locke, not Mina. Not sister. Not host. Not family. Not even guest. Staff. The word clung to me like smoke. Production note insert shot of the card wobbling faintly in the gust from the air conditioner, its shadow trembling across the white cloth. Cut the background noise to silence except for the hollow thud of a heartbeat, mine rushing too fast, too loud. I stared at the card as if it might rearrange itself into something kinder, but it didn't. The others barely noticed. They took their seats, chattered about promotions and vacations, filled their glasses, adjusted their napkins. The card sat there, unchallenged, declaring me less than the people I had fed, less than the family whose roof I had bought, less than the neighbors who barely knew my name. When Valora swept in with her golden laugh and raised glass, she didn't even look at me. She looked through me like the staff label had already erased me from her world. I lowered the tray onto the table, hands stiff knuckles whitening. My reflection wavered in the sheen of a spoon beside the card distorted stretch no longer mine. The soundscape of the room shifted in my ears' forks, striking plates, chairs squeaking against the hardwood laughter building like static. But underneath it all pulsed the same motif, the thrum of my own heart, reminding me that I was still here no matter how they tried to rename me. That card was the first wobble, the first tilt in a table I had tried so hard to steady. You could call it a mistake, a thoughtless gesture, maybe even a joke. But I knew better. It was deliberate. Someone had typed it, printed it, placed it. Someone had decided. And in the silence of complicity, no one removed it. I hovered at the edge of the table, unsure where to put myself. I could sit down, pretend I belonged, ignore the label glaring up at me. Or I could leave, and in leaving let them believe the card was right. Neither choice felt like mine. I thought of my mother's chair, still empty in this house. She would have torn the card in half, tucked me beside her, told me names don't erase blood. But she wasn't here. And so I stood staring at the wobbling rectangle, feeling my pulse pound against my ribs like it wanted out. For a moment, I almost reached for it. My fingers twitched, itching to fold the card flat to crush the word staff into pulp. But my hand froze, suspended above the white tablecloth, caught between rebellion and surrender. And that's when I realized silence is not neutral. Silence is its own kind of agreement. I swallowed hard, the taste of rosemary and salt turning bitter on my tongue, and let the tray slide from my hands. Glasses chimed, chairs scraped. Laughter swelled again. The card stayed upright, wobbling faintly, announcing to everyone that I wasn't one of them. Tell me if this had been you. If your own name had been lowered in front of everyone you knew, what would you have done? Have you ever seen your own name downgraded in public? I want to ask you. Would you press 1 to speak up or 0 to stay silent? The house was quiet the night I found the scrapbook. Too quiet, as if silence itself had grown heavy in the walls. I had been searching for a recipe card, something in my mother's handwriting to anchor me back to her, when I pulled down a thick album from the shelf in the living room. Its spine cracked as I opened it, the pages swollen from years of glue and fingerprints, smelling faintly of dust and lemon polish. The first spread bloomed with pride Valora in her graduation gown cap, tilted tassel swinging as though caught in mid-celebration. Our parents beamed beside her, their hands clutching the diploma as if it belonged to all of them. Glossy photo after glossy photo, Valora in sequins at the winter dance, Valora in white lace on her wedding day, Valora holding her first paycheck at some office party. Every page told the same story, a golden girl's journey. I turned the pages slowly, my fingertips catching on the edges of plastic sleeves. The corners of some photos had started to curl glue, losing its grip. One picture slipped when I turned the page, a smiling row of bridesmaids, but no matter how carefully I pressed, the adhesive wouldn't hold. The glue had aged, gone brittle. That's what time does, I thought. It weakens the things we thought would stick forever. And then I noticed what wasn't there. No photograph of me at 17 sitting in the fluorescent hospital room braiding my mother's hair after chemotherapy stole most of it. No snapshot of the morning I signed the deed to this house pen, shaking my savings compressed into a single signature so my family could have a home. No birthday candles with my name sung. No blurred Polaroid of me behind the cake. It wasn't just absence. It was a pattern. Production note insert shot of yellowed scrapbook pages under dim lamplight. Camera pans to a blank square where a photo should have been adhesive corners stained but empty. SFX faint peel of old tape lifting, echoing like skin tearing. The motif repeated paper gone yellow with age. Corners of photos lifting away from the glue edges, curling like forgotten petals. Erasure doesn't always happen with scissors. Sometimes it happens through omission. A name is erased by simply never being written. A memory is erased by never being glued down. I pressed my thumb against one of the empty spaces. The page was tacky, a faint outline of something once planned but never placed. It struck me someone had intended to include me, maybe even cut the photo, but had stopped short of attaching it. A hole shaped like me left blank on purpose. Zoa Tenbang Kachkongdan, I whispered. Erased not by removal, but by refusal to record. In that moment, the scrapbook felt less like memory and more like indictment proof that in my family's story, I had been written in pencil, easy to rub out, while others were etched in ink. The Polaroid of my mother in her garden hat, still tucked on the kitchen counter, wasn't in here either. That moment had mattered to me. But this album had decided what mattered, and it wasn't me. The silence of those blank spaces was louder than any insult Valora had ever thrown. At least when she called me the maid, it was out loud. This was worse. This was invisibility bound in leather, printed on glossy paper, sanctioned by glue and tape. I closed the album gently, though my hands shook as if it were fragile glass. On the cover, embossed in fading gold, the word family gleamed beneath the lamp. Family, as if the word alone could fill in the holes where my face should have been. I sat there for a long time, the weight of absence pressing harder than presence ever had. The pages were proof of how easily a life can be reduced to silence, how memories can be sculpted by what's missing as much as by what's displayed. And for the first time, I wondered if the world remembers us through albums, scrapbooks, photographs. What happens to the ones of us who were never pasted in? The morning began with silence, the kind that feels staged, as though the house itself was holding its breath. I stretched, reached for the door handle the way I always did, expecting the cool brass to turn beneath my palm. Instead, it refused me. At first, I thought I had misaligned the lock the night before. I jiggled the handle, pressed my shoulder lightly against the wood. Still nothing. Then I bent down my eye level with the thin strip of light leaking through the bottom of the door. The air on the other side moved differently free, uncontained. I was inside. Contained. I tried again. The handle rattled once, then stilled. And then I heard it click. The unmistakable metallic punctuation of a lock snapping shut, deliberate final. Production note POV through the narrow crack beneath the door. Light flickers across the floorboards outside, but the frame stays tight on the darkness within. SFX. The click amplified unnaturally loud like a gunshot in an empty theater. Someone had locked me in from the outside. When I finally pressed my ear against the door, I caught muffled voices drifting from the kitchen down the hall. Words not meant for me. Phrases like peace and quiet, just for a while, she'll be fine. My sister's cadence was unmistakable, bright sharp, designed to slice without ever raising her volume. I pressed my palm against the wood. My own heartbeat thudded back into me, amplified by the barrier. It was more than inconvenience. It was more than insult. It was a theft. They had taken my ability to step into the hallway, to walk into the kitchen, to exist as an equal in this house I had bought locked away for some quiet. As if my presence was noise. As if my breath was disruption. The symbolism hit with the force of a storm I had long seen forming but never named. The physical lock was just a prop in a play that had been running for years. This wasn't about a doorknob. This was about ownership of where I could stand, what I could say, even how I could exist. The room shrank around me, 4 walls, ceiling, floor. The space that had once been mine transformed into a cell. My body wasn't free. My life, the one I'd spent a decade building with split shifts and calloused hands, had been reduced to the square footage of a single bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the doorknob, as if staring hard enough could undo the lock. The metal glinted in a streak of early sunlight, a cruel reminder of the world still spinning outside the barrier. I thought of my mother's empty chair at the dining table. Now here was mine, a locked room, a silent punishment. Motif returned control disguised as care. For your own good. For a little quiet. Just this once. How many times in a family's script does control get dressed up as kindness? The longer I sat there, the louder the metaphors pressed against me. The door wasn't wood. It was every omission in the scrapbook, every laugh that labeled me Maid, every silence when my name should have been defended. The lock was the sound of their decision, made flesh a boundary I had never consented to. My chest tightened until my breaths came short and shallow. I pressed my forehead against the cool surface of the door, as if contact might soften it, as if I could will my way through. But the wood did not give. It stood as rigid as their silence. The click echoed long after it had faded. What struck me most wasn't the lock itself, it was the ordinariness of the act. A simple twist of a key, an act so small it could almost be dismissed. And yet it held the entire weight of a truth I hadn't wanted to face in this house. My body was not fully my own. When I finally heard footsteps retreating and laughter rising in the kitchen, I sank back onto the bed. The ceiling above me blurred my eyes burning. For the first time, I felt like a stranger in the house I had sacrificed a decade to buy. That morning, I learned that sometimes the cruelest erasures aren't loud or violent. Sometimes they're as quiet as a lock sliding into place, as simple as someone deciding your freedom is optional. And the worst part, everyone else in the house kept eating breakfast as though nothing had happened. It started with a piece of paper. Not a fight, not a slammed door, not even a cruel laugh. Just an envelope from the utility company slipped through the mail slot the way it always had been. I tore it open without thinking, standing in the kitchen where the smell of last night's rosemary roast still clung to the air. The paper was thin cheap, folded into 3 creases. I had seen this letter 100 times before: electric bill, my name across the top, my house, my responsibility. But this time the words struck like a fist. Account holder Valora Locke. Not Mina. Not me. For a moment I thought it was a clerical error, a typo, a glitch in the system. But the more I stared, the clearer it became. My name wasn't misspelled. It was missing. Replaced. Erased. Production note: high-angle shot of the bill as it slips from my hand, floating down onto the kitchen floor. Cut to papers scattered wide across the hardwood camera, panning over them like crime scene evidence. The motif sharpens each paper proof, each missing name, a fingerprint of betrayal. My chest tightened. I dropped to my knees, sweeping through the filing box I kept beneath my bed, the box I had filled for years. Receipts from the hardware store, closing documents from the bank tax returns, where every line spelled out my sacrifice. And most of all, utility bills, month after month, always with my name printed clean across the top: account holder Mina Locke. Until now. I spread them across the floor, page after page, like a timeline of ownership. My handwriting in the margins, notes about due dates, reminders to call if the meter seemed wrong. Every piece of paper a brick in the foundation of this house I had built. And then, like a stain spreading across a white sheet, her name appeared. Not once. Not twice. But on multiple bills. Valora, slipped in as if she had always been there, as if history could be rewritten with a keystroke. The longer I looked, the more the floor transformed into something else. Not bills, not records, but fingerprints. Not ink, but grease left behind by hands that had touched what was mine. She had marked the house with her claim, left her trail across documents I had once trusted to speak only for me. I pressed my fingers against one of the bills, tracing the letters of her name the way I used to trace my mother's script on a recipe card. The difference was brutal. My mother's ink gave me belonging. My sister's print took it away. The room tilted. The quiet of the house no longer felt like peace, it felt like complicity. Had my father noticed, had my mother before she died? Or had they all looked at the bills, nodded, and accepted the new story written in black and white? It wasn't about electricity. It wasn't about dollars and cents. It was about something deeper, a slow theft creeping through paper trails. A rewriting of ownership, not by force, but by font. I remembered something my mother once said when I was a teenager, balancing her checkbook at the kitchen table. Paper tells the truth, Mina. It doesn't lie. But she was wrong. Paper lies easily. It lies when someone changes the name at the top. It lies when no one bothers to stop it. I sat there on the hardwood floor, surrounded by papers, my breath shallow. High-angle Mina in frame documents spread like wings around her, but instead of lifting her, they pin her down. In that moment, I understood betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in a quiet envelope, disguised as routine, disguised as fact. The bill was more than a statement. It was a fingerprint pressed into my life, claiming what I had built, what I had earned. And it was only the beginning. It began with the name card. A flimsy rectangle of cardstock printed in black ink, left wobbling in front of my plate like a verdict support staff: M. Locke. They thought it would disappear after the dinner ended, folded into trash with paper napkins and half-empty bottles of Merlot, but I slipped it into my bag when no one was watching. Proof. That night, under the thin glow of my desk lamp, I laid it on the surface like contraband. Its edges were slightly bent, a grease smudge in the corner from someone's careless thumb. I took a photo with my phone, then scanned it. The sound of the scanner whined across the room, spitting the card into pixels. And just like that, the first piece of my archive was born. Production note montage sequence camera sweeps over bills spread on the floor, the whir of a printer spitting pages, the cold click of a mouse as a folder name changes on a computer screen. My side of the story. Each shot cut in sharp rhythm with the hum of the scanner bed and the hollow clunk of files dropping into place. The folder grew quickly. Bills with my name replaced by Valora's. Bank statements where my signature bore the weight of down payments, repairs, property taxes. A photocopy of the deed that carried only my name until suddenly it didn't. I cataloged them one by one, scanned, labeled, dated. Each document was a kind of photograph, not of faces, but of truths. They thought they could erase me by omission, by silence, by slipping her name in where mine had stood. But paper doesn't forget once you capture it. Then came the recording. It happened on a Tuesday mid-afternoon when Valora was pacing the porch with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried through the cracked window of my room. I had learned to tune out her endless monologues, but one sentence froze me. Honestly, I'm the one holding this house together. Without me, it would all fall apart. My chest clenched. I reached for the old handheld recorder I used for lectures in college, thumb trembling as I pressed record. She kept talking, her voice rising with pride, embellishing her story for the friend on the other end. Mina. She just floats around, does little things here and there. But I'm the one gone vac, shouldering the whole place. Everyone knows it. Click. Another truth captured. Another fingerprint preserved. Listening back later, I felt two things at once, fury and clarity. Fury that she had stolen not just documents, but the narrative of my life. Clarity that I couldn't rely on anyone else to remember what was real. If I didn't gather the proof, the story would calcify into her version. So I kept collecting. Every receipt, every photo, every accidental admission. The scrapbook had holes where I'd been erased, but my folder would be the opposite. A record so undeniable it couldn't be rewritten. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about authorship. Who gets to tell the story of this house? Who gets to decide what's remembered and what's forgotten? For too long, I'd let silence be their editor. No more. Motif returned images of documents under harsh lamplight. The steady click of the mouse as I renamed files, the weight of the folder growing on my desktop. Each piece was a stitch binding my scattered life into something coherent. When I dragged the last file into the folder, the screen blinked. My side of the story. 3 words glared back at me, equal parts defiance and confession. For the first time, I felt something like steadiness. The world might laugh at a maid, but I had receipts. And receipts, unlike memory, don't flinch. The box was heavier than I remembered. Dust filmed the lid edges, softened by years of neglect. I had pulled it down from the attic on a whim, chasing the faint hope that something of my mother still lingered inside. The air smelled of insulation and cedar, the scent of a space designed to forget what it contained. When I lifted the lid, my hands brushed old holiday ornaments, a broken snow globe, stacks of yellowing envelopes. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a towel like something fragile, lay the camcorder. It was bulky black plastic, scuffed at the corners. A relic of the years before phones fit into pockets. My thumb found the eject button stiff but willing, and the compartment opened with a reluctant click. Inside waited a VHS-C tape label written in my mother's tidy cursive will, August 14th. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Production note close-up of the camcorder in Mina's hands, light catching the ridges of dust, her reflection faint in the lens. Insert audio, a faint whir of old machinery, spinning up warm and imperfect like breath, returning to a body thought long gone. I hunted through the garage until I found the adapter cords tangled like veins. Setting it all up in the living room felt like building a shrine. The TV flickered screen glowing blue before resolving into static and then motion. There was my mother. She sat at the dining table, her quilt folded neatly over the chair hair thinner than I wanted to remember. A pen rested beside her. Papers, official papers, spread across the table. The attorney's voice guided her gently through the clauses, but it was her voice that mattered. Her voice steady but soft, carrying more weight than any ink could. She read the lines slowly, naming names, dividing what little there was with the kind of care only someone who has lived inside sacrifice knows. Then she paused. Her eyes lifted not to the lawyer, but to the lens. To me. And she said it. Mina keeps this house. Because she already paid for it with her life. The words struck like bells, resonant, undeniable. I pressed closer to the screen as though I could step inside, as though I could sit beside her and hold her hand again. Tears blurred the image until her face rippled, but the sound her voice cut through clean. The tape whirred on, capturing every syllable. Proof embedded in magnetic ribbons. Technology may age, but truth does not. I replayed that moment again and again, the sentence like oxygen after years of suffocation. All the laughter that named me Maid. All the silence that erased me from albums. All the locks that turned me into an intruder in my own home, this cut through it. My mother's voice naming me as the rightful keeper. Not because of blood, not because of birth order, but because of sacrifice. The VHS tape grew warm in my hands, the camcorder humming faintly like a heart still beating long after she was gone. I wanted to clutch it to my chest, but instead I pressed pause, the screen freezing on her eyes. Motif repeated old machinery, revealing new truth. The picture was grainy, the colors fading at the edges, but the substance glowed brighter than anything modern. For years I had been told my work didn't count, that my contributions were invisible, that I was secondary. But here was proof my mother saw me. She recorded it. She sealed it. The rest of the tape droned on with legal language, but I didn't need it. I had my sentence. My line. The one truth I could hold like a talisman. When the tape clicked to an end, the TV went black. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one hummed with promise, with the possibility that absence could still speak. I sat on the carpet with the camcorder heavy in my lap, whispering her words to myself until they etched into my bones. Mina keeps this house because she already paid for it with her life. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I wasn't crazy for wanting proof. I had always been right to keep records, to hold on to evidence. My mother had been doing the same, just in her own way, with an old camera and a voice that still reached me through time. The VHS whirred down into silence. But her truth kept spinning inside me, unstoppable. It came on a Thursday morning, hidden inside the stack of junk mail and grocery flyers. At first, I didn't even notice it, just another envelope printed with my name in neat black ink. But when I tore it open, the words inside jolted me awake faster than any cup of coffee ever could. Credit alert, new application, $40,000 or loan. My name blazed across the page like a crime scene spotlight. Applicant Mina Locke. Only I had never applied. My pulse hammered as I scanned the fine print. Terms, interest rates, repayment schedules. None of it mine, yet all of it tied to me. I sank into the chair, the paper trembling in my hands, my skin prickling as though someone had just called my name in a crowded room. It wasn't a mistake. It was a theft dressed up as paperwork. I rushed to the folder under my bed, the same one where I had gathered every bill, every receipt, every scrap of evidence. I pulled out an older file I barely remembered, an authorization form I'd once signed for utilities. But the more I looked, the more the page betrayed itself. Production note, split screen shot on the left, my actual signature from an old utility form. On the right, the forged one from the loan application. The camera zooms red highlight, boxing each shaky curve of the letters. The forged M in Mina swayed like a drunk imitation. The L in Locke copied but hollow. Someone had taken my name, stretched it across their ambition, and stamped it onto debt. And then the second discovery hit harder than the first. Tucked behind the loan documents in the scan file was another sheet. At first, it looked harmless, another form, another piece of bureaucracy. But when I leaned closer, the truth unraveled. It wasn't just a loan application. It was a disguised transfer of ownership. A property authorization camouflaged as routine paperwork signed not by me, but by some trembling copy of me. The house. My house. My life's work. All slotted neatly into a false narrative as though my consent could be manufactured with a practiced hand and a borrowed pen. The motif repeated not knives or shouting, but paper wielded as weapon. A page, a signature, a substitution, and suddenly everything I had built teetered on the edge of vanishing. I spread the documents across the table, my hands shaking so badly I almost tore them. Each one was an accusation proof of betrayal made visible in ink. I compared line after line, my real handwriting against the forgery. My strokes curved with weight and hesitation, hers with arrogance and speed. Side by side, the difference was obvious. And yet, to a bank, to a clerk, to anyone else, it might look close enough. That was the terror of it. The lie didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to exist. I pressed my palms flat against the table, surrounded by papers that seemed to sneer back at me. In the dim light of the kitchen, I felt cornered not by walls, but by forms. A bureaucracy of betrayal. My mother's voice captured on the camcorder just days before echoed inside me. Mina keeps this house, because she already paid for it with her life. And here was proof that someone was trying to undo even her dying words. I wanted to storm into the next room, confront Valora, slam the papers down in front of her, and demand she look me in the eye. But another part of me, the part that had been collecting receipts and scans, whispered caution. Evidence first. Always evidence. Production note, the sound of a highlighter squeaking across the page, boxing an applicant Mina Locke in violent red. The hum of a scanner kicking to life, pulling each document into permanence. Cursor clicks on a folder. My side of the story. New files sliding in one by one, digital locks against analog lies. My hands shook, but my resolve steadied. They could steal signatures. They could forge names. But they could not erase proof once it was captured. Still, the question hung in the air like smoke. How long before silence turned complicit? How long before gathering evidence wasn't enough? I sat in the glow of the computer screen. Documents splayed around me like broken glass and felt the weight of a decision pressing down. Have you ever discovered your own name forged onto something life-changing? I want to ask you. Would you press 1 to gather every piece of evidence first, or press 0 to confront immediately? The letter arrived in red. Not the paper itself, just the ink stamped across the corner of the envelope, a law firm's insignia embossed in the shade of warning. It was thicker than junk mail, thinner than anything you'd hope for. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight not of paper but of accusation. When I slid a knife through the seal and unfolded the document, the words hit harder than any insult my sister had ever spoken aloud. Cease and desist. The language was cold metallic, sharpened to cut. They accused me of harassment, of interfering with rightful ownership, of badgering the very person who had stolen my name from the bills, my signature from the deeds, my place from the family table. The irony twisted so deep it almost made me laugh. Almost. Production note insert shot of the red letterhead document sliding across the table, its edges catching candlelight. SFX, a faint whoosh like a blade unsheathing. Camera tilt down to Mina's hands, knuckles blanching as she flattens the page. The words pretended to be law, but I knew what they really were, theater. A performance meant to scare me into silence. A paper bullet aimed at my resolve. But paper cuts both ways. I walked to my bedroom, pulled the manila envelope from the bottom drawer. On the front, in black marker, I had written 2 words, if pushed. Inside lay everything I'd been gathering for months, scanned bills, forged signatures, recordings of my sister bragging, the VHS clip of my mother's voice naming me as the rightful keeper of the house. Each page, each file, a bullet in a magazine I prayed I'd never need to fire. The cease and desist slid inside, joining the arsenal. One more piece of ammunition in a war fought with staples and ink. The motif was clear now. The manila envelope was no longer a container. It was a weapon, a paper armory. My truth folder wasn't just protection anymore. It had become my stockpile. My evidence wasn't scattered fragments. It was organized, named ready. I stared at the envelope, its edges fattening with each new addition. It was ugly in its way, bulging, strained against its own seams. But it was the ugliest kind of necessary. Proof gathered not because I wanted to fight, but because I had no choice. The letter thought it could scare me into silence. Instead, it clarified the battlefield. I imagined the attorney's office drafting it, my sister sitting smugly beside them, rehearsing her role as the wronged party. I imagined their laughter at the idea that I would fold. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I already had a vault of truth pressed flat in that envelope, ready to open like a trapdoor beneath them. Production note, montage hands, sliding the red letter into the manila folder. The thump as it lands atop other documents. The marker strokes deepening the words, if pushed. Cut to a close-up of the clasp snapping shut, a metallic click resonating like the cocking of a gun. I sat back the envelope heavy on my lap and felt the strangest calm. They could threaten me. They could accuse me. They could twist the story in public on paper in courtrooms. But I had the one thing lies can't counterfeit: receipts. The cease and desist was supposed to be their shield, their weapon. Instead, it became mine. I tucked the envelope back into the drawer, closed it gently, and whispered to myself, "Push me and I'll answer. Because family wars don't always end in shouting. Sometimes they end in paper. And paper remembers. There comes a point when collecting evidence is no longer enough. Proof hidden in drawers, tucked in manila envelopes, only whispers in the dark. To matter, it must leave your hands and enter the record." That morning, I packed everything into a folder so heavy it seemed to carry not just paper, but years of silence, years of labor, years of theft. The deed, the bank statements, copies of utility bills in my name before they were forged, photographs of me standing beside the notary's desk, pen in hand, timestamp burned into the corner. Even the attorney's letter from my mother's estate with her signature trembling at the bottom but still unmistakably hers. The folder thudded against my ribs as I carried it into the county office. The building smelled of floor polish and dust fluorescent lights humming like bees overhead. Behind the counter, a clerk glanced up, eyes dull with the repetition of thousands of filings, never knowing some of those filings were lifelines. I slid the folder forward. My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Production note, macro close-up of the clerk's hand lifting a rubber stamp ink pad, pressed the stamp slamming down in slow motion. The sound is amplified, a single cop echoing like a drumbeat. The red date blooms across the page, time frozen, sealed, undeniable. That sound was more than ink on paper. It was the moment private truth became public record. I imagined Valora's face when she realized her version of the story could no longer erase mine. She had her forged signatures, her doctored bills, her laughter over wine glasses. But I had this, a government record that could outlast both of us. The clerk didn't know the weight of what she was handling. To her, it was just another packet of deeds, affidavits, notarized statements. But to me, it was armor. Every cop of the stamp was a heartbeat steadying mine. As the pages stacked higher, I felt something shift inside me. For months, I'd been surviving in fragments, locked doors, missing photos, altered bills. Every moment had been reaction. But here, in this sterile office with its buzzing lights and indifferent clerks, I was no longer just reacting. I was authoring. Each document bore a timestamp, now a marker that said this happened here at this hour on this day. And for the first time, the truth no longer lived only in my memory or in a folder hidden under my bed. It lived in the county's archive, etched into the machinery of bureaucracy. Paper fighting paper. Motif returned, stamp seals ink. They were once symbols of exclusion, the forged documents that replaced my name, the cease and desist that tried to silence me. Now they became symbols of defense, of permanence. When the clerk finally slid the receipt back to me, her fingers brushing mine in an absent gesture, I felt a surge of something dangerously close to hope. The system was slow, flawed, often blind. But it had one virtue: it kept records. And records once filed could not be laughed away over dinner. I walked out into the sunlight, the receipt folded neatly in my pocket, the echo of the stamp still reverberating in my ears. My mother's words rang again from the VHS tape, "Mina keeps this house," because she already paid for it with her life. Now the law carried her voice alongside mine. The courthouse steps stretched before me, ordinary concrete under an ordinary sky. But to me, they felt like a stage. One chapter of silence had ended. Another was about to begin. The mediation room looked nothing like the home I had fought for. It was sterile, 4 beige walls, 1 rectangular table, plastic chairs that creaked under the weight of anyone sitting too long. A fluorescent light hummed overhead, its buzz, faint but steady like a warning. Valora sat across from me, perfectly composed, as though she were walking into a luncheon instead of a battle. Her hair shone like she had stepped straight out of a salon, her folders slim and neat, curated to look professional. She smiled politely at the mediator, then tilted her head in mock sorrow when it was her turn to speak. "My sister?" She began, her voice dipped in sugar, has been struggling emotionally. It's been very difficult for her to accept change. What you're seeing here isn't a property dispute, it's instability. It's her inability to cope. Instability. The word dropped like a stone in my chest. Production note, the soundtrack drops out. Silence so complete it rings. The only noise, the faint shuffle of papers as Valora slides her evidence across the table, the scrape of her manicured nails against the folder. I leaned forward, the weight of months pressing through my hands, and pushed my envelope across the table. Not slim, not curated, but full. Heavy enough to land with a thud that made even the mediator blink. "Truth folder," I said quietly. One by one, I laid the contents out under the white light. The deed, my name inked, notarized, stamped. The bills month after month in my handwriting, my checks, my signatures, until the sudden appearance of hers, copied but crooked. The photo of the family album with captions where my name had been cut out, literally trimmed away with scissors as though absence could erase existence. And finally, a letter. Not typed, not notarized, but handwritten. My mother's hand, shaky but deliberate, retrieved from the safekeeping of her oldest friend. Words that couldn't be forged because their shape was hers, imperfect alive. "This house belongs to Mina. She gave her life to it, and I want her to stay safe in it." The room stilled. Even the hum of the lights seemed to falter. Production note close-up shots, the mediator's eyes scanning pages, turning under white glare, the faint scrape of paper against paper louder than breathing. Camera tilts up to the fluorescent light, haloing the scene in stark white as though the room itself had turned into a courtroom. Valora's smile twitched at the edges. She laughed lightly, a brittle sound, and gestured toward me. "You see, she's been collecting things. Holding on. It's obsessive." But the evidence sat between us like a wall. Her words bounced against it, thin and hollow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Paper spoke louder than denial. Each stamp, each seal, each handwritten loop of my mother's letters carried more weight than Valora's performance. For months, I had been erased in silence, diminished by laughter, locked out of my own door. Now the silence belonged to her. Every page I turned deepened it, stripping her words until they dissolved in the air like smoke. When the mediator finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. He didn't offer judgment, not yet. That wasn't his role. But his eyes lingered on the documents longer than they lingered on her rehearsed speeches, and that was enough for now. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the tremor in my fingertips finally begin to slow. For the first time in a long time, the truth wasn't just mine to carry it, sat there in the open, undeniable, lit by the harsh white glare of the mediation room. This wasn't the final battle, but it was the first time I felt the ground tilt back beneath my feet. If you were sitting in that room watching this unfold, who would you believe? Press 1 if you stand with me, Mina. Press 0 if you believe my sister. It didn't happen in the mediation room. It didn't happen in front of lawyers or under the sterile light of official stamps. The shift began somewhere I couldn't have predicted, on a screen in the place where reputation lives and dies, now the community forum. For years, Valora had painted herself there as the perfect figurehead. She called herself a community coach, posting advice columns about resilience, about leadership, about holding families together. People quoted her, praised her, tagged her name like it was a badge of wisdom. I watched in silence, always the shadow behind the curtain, never the one with the microphone. But one evening, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I almost ignored it. Notifications had become a source of dread, each one carrying the possibility of another blow. But the preview caught my eye. Exposé, the coach who lied. My breath caught. I opened the article. Line by line, the facade crumbled. Screenshots of forged documents, whispered testimonies from people who'd seen her temper up close. A timeline pieced together from public records that didn't match her narrative. It was everything I had been gathering, but it hadn't come from me. Someone else had noticed. Someone else had spoken. My phone vibrated again, messages this time. Names I hadn't seen in months. People who had once been her allies who had defended her while I sat in silence. Their words lit up the screen one by one. "I'm sorry, Mina. I should have seen it earlier. We believed her. We shouldn't have. You deserved better." Each message landed like a stone lifted from my chest. For so long, I had carried the weight of proof alone. Now finally, the world outside the walls of this house was beginning to see what I had lived. Production note close-up of the phone on the table screen glowing with notifications vibrating in staccato bursts. Cut to Mina's hand hovering over it, then slowly pressing the screen dark. The phone goes black. She turns it over, face down, the notifications silenced. I didn't run to post screenshots. I didn't call anyone to gloat. I didn't announce victory. Instead, I sat there in the dim light of the kitchen and breathed. For the first time in years, I felt air fill me without resistance, as if my lungs had been waiting for this exact moment to expand. The house smelled of rosemary again, faint but warm, and it didn't choke me. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was space. I thought of my mother, of her voice on that grainy tape. Mina keeps this house because she already paid for it with her life. And for the first time, I felt like the world was beginning to believe her too. The notifications kept buzzing even as the phone lay face down on the table. They could wait. Let the community spin its conversations. Let allies rewrite their apologies. Let headlines flash and fade. None of it mattered as much as this. The truth had cracked the shell of her image. The world was finally tilting toward light. Motif returned the glow of a screen that could have been triumph dimmed to silence by a single gesture. I didn't need to scroll, didn't need to prove myself further. Proof had already begun to live outside me. And so I closed my eyes, inhaled fully, and let the breath go in one long exhale. It sounded ordinary, almost small. But to me, it was the sound of freedom. The house had never sounded this way before, not even in the days after my mother's funeral, when grief moved through the rooms like fog. This silence was different. It was hollowed out, stripped bare, punctuated only by the scrape of cardboard against the floor and the muffled thud of drawers being emptied. Valora didn't announce she was leaving. There was no grand speech, no door-slamming tantrum, no proclamation of injustice. She simply moved as if she'd been planning it all along, methodical, quiet, efficient. A suitcase rolled behind her like an obedient shadow, its zipper teeth flashing under the thin stripe of afternoon sun that slipped through the blinds. I stayed in the hallway, leaning against the frame of my door, watching. Every object she carried out bore my fingerprints, a lamp I'd bought with diner tips, a quilt our mother had sewn, a set of dishes I had chosen carefully when I first signed the deed to this house. She lifted them as if they belonged to her, and in the past I would have argued. I would have rushed to snatch them back to remind her of receipts of ownership. But not today. Today, each thing she removed felt less like theft and more like release. The house was shedding her one item at a time, and with each absence came space for me to breathe. The truth had already begun to crack her image outside these walls. Articles had been written. Allies had turned quiet. Messages of apology had pinged my phone. But this moment was different. This was not public exposure. This was the private unmasking, the part where even she could no longer pretend. Production note, wide shot of the hallway, stretching long boxes leaning against the walls like silent witnesses. Afternoon light cuts across the wooden floor in bands catching dust motes in midair. The soundscape pairs down to the essentials tape, ripping cardboard, folding the faint drag of luggage wheels. Finally, she reached the door. She turned once, her hand resting on the knob, and for a moment I saw the flicker of hesitation in her face. Maybe she expected me to plead. Maybe she thought I'd demand an apology. Instead, I stepped forward. In my hand was the ring of keys. The metal was cool against my palm, familiar in the way only something carried every day can be. These were the keys I had held when the ink on the deed was still wet, when my mother called it the reunion house, when I believed hard work could anchor family. Keys that had unlocked a door for me after double shifts, when exhaustion blurred into hope. Keys that had been turned more than once to lock me in instead of letting me out. I held them out now, the ring dangling, the small jingle sharp in the silence. Her eyes widened, a flash of confusion crossing her face. Did she think I was surrendering? Did she think this was a peace offering, one last concession in the war she had orchestrated? I kept my voice steady, each word clear as glass. Good luck with the mortgage. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It was calm, almost gentle. But the weight of it landed harder than any scream could have, because she knew. We both knew. The mortgage had been mine to carry alone from the beginning. The nights of ramen dinners, the years of double jobs, the signatures, the payments, the sacrifices. She had never borne that weight. And now, stripped of performance, she was left facing the one truth she couldn't laugh away: she would never be able to hold it. Her fingers reached for the keys, then recoiled as if the metal burned. She pressed her lips together, searching for a retort, for some line to shatter the moment. None came. Her hand fell back to her side, empty. Production note close-up of her hand twitching, then retreating. The camera cuts to the keys gleaming in Mina's palm, their edges glinting in the last light of day. Wide shot again, the hall stretching empty. Her figure framed against the open doorway, half in shadow, half in sun. She opened the door. Afternoon air pressed in, carrying the faint sound of a car engine outside a bird perched on the wire. She stepped through suitcase wheels, bumping over the threshold. The door closed with a groan, the latch clicking into place. Not slammed, just shut. And then silence. For a moment, I didn't move. I stood in the hall, the ring of keys still heavy in my hand. They weighed more now, not because of what they held, but because of what they no longer carried. For the first time in years, they belonged only to me. The light shifted across the floor, long and golden, stretching toward the walls. The house exhaled wood, creaking softly as though relieved of a burden. I leaned back against the wall and let my shoulders drop. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was mine. I thought of my mother again, of her voice on that tape, her words etched into me. Mina keeps this house because she already paid for it with her life. And as the last rays of the sun slid across the wooden floorboards, I whispered back into the emptiness. We're home now. This time I believed it. The house feels like mine in a way it never has before. Not because it is quieter, not because the mortgage is paid down, but because I can finally walk through every hallway without feeling like I am trespassing in my own story. I began in the living room, the old battleground of our dinners. Once that space had been staged for humiliation, the table set with candles and wine, my sister's voice cutting me down in front of others, laughter covering the sting like a cheap perfume. Now I stripped it bare. I sold the table, donated the extra chairs, rolled up the rug that smelled faintly of spilled Merlot and covered secrets. In its place, I built something softer, something mine. I stacked mismatched shelves against the walls, the kind you find in thrift shops that wobble a little until you anchor them. I filled them with books rescued from garage sales, their pages worn, their spines creased. Each one to me was a survivor. I brought in a chair from my mother's old sewing room, a little threadbare but sturdy, angled perfectly toward the window. Now the afternoon light lands there, turning the pages gold. And above it all on the mantel I hung a frame, inside my mother's recipe card. The same one stained with oil, the ink blurred where her hand pressed too hard. For years it sat tucked in a drawer, its edges curling like it was ashamed of being old forgotten. Now it rests behind glass honored. Her handwriting imperfect but alive watches over the room. When I pass by, I trace the loops of her letters with my eyes. Salt underlined 3 times because she wanted to make sure no one forgot. I didn't forget, Mama. Not the salt, not the work, not the truth you left me. But remaking the house wasn't enough. A house can be reclaimed with paint and shelves, but a voice must be reclaimed by speaking. That's why I found myself at the Literacy Center downtown. The building is nothing remarkable, wedged between a laundromat and a thrift store, its windows clouded with condensation. But inside it hums with stubborn hope. Children bend over workbooks, tongues poking from the corners of their mouths as they sound out syllables. Adults practice their signatures in careful, shaky lines, writing their names over and over as if they're building a muscle they never got to use. The first evening I walked in, the coordinator looked startled when I said I wanted to volunteer. I told her I know what it feels like to have your name taken, your story rewritten. I don't want anyone else to be erased because they couldn't hold their own words. She didn't argue. She handed me a badge. On it was my name, Mina Locke. Clear, correct mine. I pinned it to my shirt and felt a strange heat rise in my chest. Such a small thing, but so powerful. Proof that names can be written right, that stories can be anchored. Every week now, I sit at those folding tables with a red pen in my hand, guiding people through forms, helping them spell their names with certainty. Each page corrected feels like a stitch mending something torn not just for them, but for me. I realized something silence never protected me. It never shielded me from being diminished, mocked, locked out, rewritten. All it did was hand the pen to someone else. That is my declaration now. Silence does not protect us from erasure. Sometimes it gives our story away. For too long, I let other people narrate me Maid staff unstable and visible. I let their laughter and omissions become the script of my life. But not anymore. I am taking back the pen. Production note, final montage, wide shot of Mina in the transformed living room, shelves stacked with rescued books, recipe card framed above the mantel. Cut to the literacy center, a child's pencil moving across lined paper, an adult's signature curling with pride. Slow zoom on Mina's hand writing in a fresh notebook, her name in bold strokes underlined once. This is my story, my name, my voice. Not erased. Not cut out of albums, not forged on paper I never signed. Mina, keeper of this house, daughter of Evelyn who underlined salt 3 times so no one would forget. And now, finally, no one will. Have you ever had your name written wrong in someone else's story? I want to ask you. Press 1 if yes, 00 if no. Leave your comment where you're watching because every voice cut from the frame deserves to be put back in its rightful place. If this story spoke to you, if it stirred something you've carried quietly, subscribe to Real Family Drama Stories. There are more voices waiting to be heard, and the next one might be yours.